In today's video, we're going to go through a complete nutrition guide for an Ironman Triathlon. I'm going to cover everything that you need so that you can feel confident you've got the nutrition side of things sorted out. Whether this is your first Ironman or you've done loads and are just looking to fine-tune it, this video should have it all. So what is up, nutrition nerds, and welcome to what is probably a pretty long video. If you're new here, then my name's James and I'm a sports nutritionist and I also race triathlons too. Nutrition can absolutely make or break an Ironman, and sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming or scary, but it doesn't have to be. I've split today's video up into before, during and after your Ironman, and I've put chapters in the playback bar for you. If you've got any questions, then let me know in the comments and I will be happy to get back to you. Now to start with, I want to give you a very quick overview on how your body uses fuel for energy because it will make the rest of the video make more sense. When it comes to an Ironman, you have two major sources of fuel for energy, and that's fats and carbohydrates. Almost regardless of what intensity you're doing your Ironman at, you'll use a combination of the two for energy, but a larger proportion will be carbohydrates. The average person has over 50,000 calories worth of energy stored as fat. So in relation to an Ironman, that's essentially unlimited because that's not going to run out by the end of the race. However, the average person only has about 2,500 calories worth of energy stored as carbohydrates, as something called glycogen, and you've only got enough for about 90 minutes of top-end effort. So in relation to your Ironman pace, perhaps a couple of hours worth. Now if you run out of carbohydrates, you'll bonk or hit the wall. What this means is that your stored carbohydrates get to such a low level that you can't maintain the same pace or power.
And you'll have to slow down and you will feel pretty dreadful.
If you've ever ran past someone towards the end of a triathlon and they're just plodding, looking a bit vacant, and generally not particularly well, then that's probably what's happened to them. So in terms of what your nutrition focus should be during an Ironman, hopefully it's clear that if we're purely talking numbers and what stores you have available or what might run out, your focus should be on carbohydrates. But the other thing to say to round out this section is that for the vast majority of triathletes, carbohydrates are the optimal fuel source for performance. In order to race as well as you can, you need carbohydrates. So please don't go low carb or follow a ketogenic diet unless you have a specific reason to do that and have worked with a registered professional. I've done loads of videos on the whole carb and fat topic before, and I want to move on to practical advice for you. So if you've got any questions on this, then let me know in the comments. So let's get on to the first big topic, which is carb loading. This is one of my favorite topics because it's often misunderstood and actually quite hard to do, but if you get it right, it's so helpful. The aim of it is to maximize your body's carbohydrate stores that we talked about a minute or two ago, so that you have more fuel in the tank before you even start your race. Now, for a lot of people, carb loading means eating a massive pasta meal the night before, but you actually need to increase your carb intake much earlier than that. We're going to go through some quick-fire main points to it. Start carb loading about 36 to 48 hours out from your race. Research shows that this is probably the optimum time to start carb loading, and it's not necessary to do a low carb period first to be able to carb load effectively. It's also not very nice to suddenly go low carb, and in the days leading up to your race, you want to feel good. Eat 10 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight per day. Don't worry too much about protein because you'll inevitably get enough anyway, and in general aim for low-fat foods. In order to carb load properly, you have to eat a lot, and the focus should be on carbs as the name suggests. Lots of protein or fat isn't helpful and will just make you feel super full. Aim for low fiber foods. Generally, the lower fiber the better. Again, high fiber foods will just make you feel full and bloated and isn't helpful for our main aim. In a normal diet, yeah, loads of fiber, but not for carb loading. Eat more in the morning and less towards the evening. This is one that personally I found to be hugely helpful, so now I always recommend it. If you eat more towards the start of the day and taper to the evening, you'll sleep much better. If you've ever eaten loads of pizza in the evening and then had the pizza sweats, you'll know what I'm talking about. No super hard training during the carb load period. Hard training damages muscle tissue, which impairs its ability to store carbohydrates as glycogen. Remember that all your training is done, and so light training and activation work is really all that's needed. Now, those are the big points of carb loading. I have actually created a carb load guide which you can download from my website, and I've put the link in the description for you. It's got the amount of carbs, fat and protein in, and it gives you a good idea of what sort of foods that you could aim for. You can adapt it to what works well for you and your dietary preferences. Okay, so next on the list is pre-race hydration. There's not too much to say it here other than keep well hydrated before the race. Drink plenty of water and aim for your pee to be mostly clear. Be careful of pre-race excitement and exploration. Now, I know that sounds a bit boring, but don't be the athlete going to tour the village or the local area if it's a nice location in the sun, because it's not uncommon for triathletes to unknowingly get dehydrated or even sunburnt just before their race, which is really not ideal. And as a side note, you might find yourself getting really thirsty when you carb load properly. I can't find anything to support the exact reason why, but I suspect it's to do with the fact that you store water with glycogen. So when you're carb loading and storing more glycogen, you need more water to compensate for it. So, breakfast before your race. Important? Not important? Big breakfast? Little breakfast? So the answer is that breakfast is not super important. I would always recommend it if you can have it, but the aim of it is not to be super filling and power you through your race. The aim of breakfast is actually to give your energy stores a bit of a top up and generally make you feel good before your race. The main bulk of your energy that you need for your triathlon is actually from the food that you've eaten in the days before your race and the nutrition that you have during it, not from your breakfast. A big breakfast is actually much more likely to cause tummy upset and won't actually help your performance. You can go off sports nutrition guidance numbers here if you like, which look something like this, but honestly, I find that reasonably impractical for triathletes before an Ironman, given the time of day that you will usually have to eat breakfast amongst other things. Instead, eat something that you can enjoy or can at least stomach early in the morning. It ticks the boxes and you've practiced it. Like with most things race nutrition here, low fiber, low fat, low to medium protein, carb focused. My favourite in the past year has been some low fat rice pudding and a banana, and that served me well. If you have managed to have breakfast a couple of hours out from your race, then it's common to have something else before your race to help top those stores back up again. The general advice here is for 1 gram of carbs per kilogram of body weight, and this can be solely carb focused. Drinks or gels are perfect here, and a strategy that does work well is to be sipping on a carb drink in the hour or so before your start time, and then have a gel 10 to 15 minutes before the gun. Now, as with most things nutrition, it's important to practice all of what we've just mentioned. Literally practice all of it. Practice carb loading, your breakfast, your pre-race snack. Practice all of it to make sure that it feels okay and that you don't need to change anything. You also need to practice your nutrition at your race pace. As you work harder, the amount of nutrition that you can absorb decreases. So don't just practice your nutrition at easy paces below your Ironman pace and think that's okay, because it's possible that once you start to increase your pace or your power, you won't actually be able to tolerate the same amount. Practicing all of this means that you know what to expect, how you'll feel, how feasible breakfast is super early in the morning. This is as important, if not more important, as the hours that you've spent doing the actual exercise. Otherwise, all that hard effort and training that you've put in can just unravel, and we don't want that. Now, just a quick note on how to tell whether what you're practicing is working. If you're following the principles in this video in terms of recommended amounts, practicing at race pace, and you're not getting stomach upset like cramps, bloating or diarrhea, then that suggests that you're tolerating it all well. If you get problems, then you can reduce the amount of nutrition until you get to a comfortable level again. And then keep practicing, because you should actually be able to improve your tolerance over time, and we call that training your gut. If you're still getting problems despite reducing your nutrition to under what's suggested, then it might be worth trialing a different brand or type of product in case it's something in that mix that you don't get on well with. Before we move on to fueling during your Ironman, if you're finding this video useful, then I would really appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up, because it helps me out massively. If you've never done an Ironman before, then you may not know this, but generally you don't take anything in during the swim. Well, except water from the triathlete next to you. It's way too impractical and it will be far more trouble than it's worth. So onto the bike leg, and the big question is, when do you start eating or drinking? For most triathletes, I would say as soon as possible. You want to start getting the carbohydrates in early so that your body can use them. It takes a while for them to get into your system and you don't want to leave it for too long. But the other thing to mention is that the bike is super important for your nutrition. During the bike leg, your heart rate is generally lower. You don't have the aggravation or motion of running, and you've got the nutrition already available on your bike. And all of that combined means that the bike leg is where you get the most nutrition in. This is the sort of nutrition intake that happens during an Ironman. As you go through the race, generally the amount of nutrition you take in will decrease, and that's for multiple reasons, but that's why nutrition during the bike is so important. The aim during the bike leg is to consume between 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour. And you want to use products that contain a mix of glucose and fructose. And you might see maltodextrin instead of glucose. It's essentially the same thing. You've got things in your gut called transporters, and these help you to absorb carbohydrates, and glucose and fructose use different transporters. You want to max both transporters out, and the rough numbers to do so are 60 grams of glucose and 30 grams of fructose. So if you have a product with both, you maximize the amount of carbs that you can absorb, which will help with your performance. Now, there are plenty of products out there that fit the bill, and this is a highly personal area. I don't use any affiliate links or sponsorships because I want my videos to be free from any bias, so I'm not going to push you in any specific direction, but these are some of the most common ones available and how you would reach the 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour. You've got to find a product that you like the taste of, that you tolerate okay, and that you can practice repeatedly with. I would strongly advise that you start practicing your nutrition months out from your Ironman. Literally months out. Start practicing it before your swim. Practice swim bike run, all of it to make sure that it's okay. The swim bike one, by the way, is often neglected, but you need to know how your tummy feels after an open water swim and then getting onto the bike. Now, if you've been listening to all of this, you might be thinking that actually, in practical terms, it's quite hard to get 60 to 90 grams of carbs per hour repeatedly. You might have the nutrition with you for the start, for the first couple of hours, but what do you do after that? Well, you make use of aid stations and whatever bike storage you have, and that might include taping things to your top tube. Have a look at what on-course nutrition is available, and then you can factor that into your nutrition plan for the day. Try to practice anything that you're going to use from the course nutrition to make sure that you tolerate that too. When it comes to aid stations, it's far better to make sure that you get the aid rather than just trying to keep your speed up. This is one of those things which triathletes often fret about a lot. You know, if you slow down, you're going to lose valuable seconds. Sure, you might lose a couple of seconds, but I can promise you that come the end of the race, you are going to be extremely grateful that you got that nutrition, and you will easily make that time back and more. There are lots of different schools of thought on hydration, and the most important thing to say is that everyone is different and there isn't a one-size-fits-all rule. It's up to you to find a strategy that fits you best and also match it to the race conditions and climate. However, I realise that's not actually that helpful for the most part, so let's go over some rule of thumb guidance. Now, you can drink to thirst, but for the Ironman distance, I'm not the biggest fan of it. It's quite easy to get distracted, to keep debating whether or not you're actually thirsty, worry whether you're drinking too much. The end result is you're not drinking when you really should have. Or perhaps you go the other way and drink loads because it's hot and humid and you've got a dry mouth. So because of that, I think it's sensible to have a game plan going in, and 500 milliliters of fluid per hour on the bike is a great starting point for most triathletes. This is enough to help mitigate the effects of dehydration, but shouldn't be so much that you overhydrate. Then you can play around and find out what works best from a personal point of view. There are different options for the fluid itself, and that depends on your overall fueling strategy. This might be water and a sports mix containing carbs and salt, or it might just be water and salt without the carbs, where your focus from the drink is solely hydration. The critical point is that you shouldn't just have water on its own. I'll say that again to emphasize it. You shouldn't just drink water on its own during your Ironman. When you sweat, you lose some of a mineral called sodium, and this mineral is vital for loads of different bodily functions. So you need to replace it, especially over the Ironman distance, because you are going to sweat. If you don't replace sodium with your fluid, you dilate the amount of sodium in your blood, and that can lead to a condition called hyponatremia, where your blood sodium levels are lower than the normal range, and that can be dangerous. The current guidance is for your fluid to contain at least 250 milligrams of sodium per 500 milliliters of fluid, or 500 milligrams of sodium per liter of fluid. Some people will need more and some people will need less. That's quite individual, and it also depends on things like climate and conditions, but those numbers are a pretty good starting point. It should tell you on the packet of your sports nutrition product how much salt or sodium it contains. By the way, salt is the generic term that we use for sodium chloride. Sodium chloride is made up of 60% chloride and 40% sodium. That means that if your packet says 1 gram of salt, there's 400 milligrams of sodium, so you can still work out how much sodium your product contains. The last thing to add is that you could have water on its own and then use something like salt tablets or sticks, and you just need to read the packet instructions there, as they can vary. As I mentioned, the bike is a really important time to get your nutrition on board, but the run leg still is important. Whilst we generally say 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour for the bike, that's often unrealistic for the run. If you can do that, awesome. But otherwise, it's reasonable to actively aim to consume less, but make sure it goes well. Better to consume a bit less and not get tummy upset than to go for 90 grams of carbs per hour and then have to walk because you've got an awful stitch. The two big things here for run nutrition are to check the course nutrition to see what aid stations contain, and then to practice that. Don't try anything new on race day. I know it might be tempting, but if you haven't practiced eating crisps or pretzels or even bananas, then I wouldn't recommend doing that then during your race. Work out what you're going to use for the run portion and practice that exact nutrition during training. A perfect example here would be to do a long brick session where you practice your exact bike and run nutrition in combination on multiple days. Now, a pretty common and fair question is whether you have to use products like gels or sports drinks. Can you, for example, eat sandwiches? The answer is yeah, it's just not optimal. As much as I'd love to say that you could have other things, generally it's just far better to go for sport-specific products. They're simple, purpose-made, easy to digest and absorb. If you really want to have solid foods, have a look at energy bars or chewy blocks, as these can help to break up that taste fatigue, but still give you what you need. Solid foods like bars or sandwiches are much more likely to cause stomach upset, especially on the run leg, so just bear that in mind. If you want something more solid, you're better off having that earlier into the bike leg. You get the option of picking your special needs bag up roughly halfway through your bike and your run. There's lots of different things that you can put in them, and that's personal, but that includes nutrition. So if you can pick them up, should you include nutrition in them and plan that into your race? Well, I would say it's probably best not to. For one reason or another, it's not guaranteed that you'll get your bag or whatever is in there is still as expected. It's better to plan your nutrition strategy without this bag in mind, because if that fails and then you're stuck, things could unravel pretty quickly. Of course, you can still include nutrition in it and see it as a bonus, but I think it's better to plan without it, know what the course and the aid stations have, and then have that bag as a fallback. Now let's talk caffeine. Is it useful during an Ironman? Heck yeah, it is. Caffeine has clear benefits for triathletes. It reduces the perception of pain and fatigue and provides alertness, all of which are helpful for you. Generally, the advice is to use caffeine towards the latter parts of your race, because that's when you're really starting to fatigue and will really feel the benefits. Any time after the second half of your bike is a good time to start taking it. You can use whatever you want here as long as you've practiced it. Caffeinated gum, drinks or gels or other products with caffeine in, all of these are great options for giving a caffeine hit, which will help you to give you that pickup that you need. Generally 1 to 3 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight is an effective dose. So what you can do here is have that as one dose or multiple little ones over a period of time. The half-life of caffeine is about 6 hours, so you can factor that in to consider whether you want to have more later on in your race. I know I've said this so many times already in this video, but make sure to practice this in training to make sure that you can tolerate it okay, as sometimes adding caffeine can cause gastrointestinal upset. But caffeine can be an awesome tool for triathletes, as it's inevitable that you'll start to get tired, things will start to hurt, and you're not always going to be feeling great. But you've just got to keep on going, even when it's tough, until you hear those words.
Oh my gosh! You are an Ironman!
Congratulations on completing your Ironman. What an incredible achievement. Let's imagine that you have just finished and give you some quick tips on post-race nutrition, because it doesn't feel like this would be a complete nutrition guide without mentioning it. Of course, you're going to want to celebrate, and you absolutely should, but you can help your body to recover, soak up that amazing feeling, and probably feel much better afterwards too, so that you can really enjoy the experience. The best way to remember your post-race nutrition is with 4 R's. They are refuel, repair, rehydrate, and rest. To refuel, we want to start replenishing your body's carb stores. The aim is 1 gram of easy to absorb carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight. Now, you might have had enough of carby sports drinks by this point, but they are great for this. Otherwise, you've got things like sweets, white bread or pasta, just easily, readily absorbable carbs. To repair, we want to give your body protein to help repair the damaged muscle tissue. At least 20 grams of protein here is a great start, and that could be from a protein powder, meat or fish, or protein found in milks like cow's milk or soya milk. Any of these are good options. And you don't have to be too exact on the carbs or protein front, it's just to make you aware and prompt you. To rehydrate, simply drink some fluid. The current advice is to replace 125 to 150% of your sweat losses over the 4 to 6 hours after your race. But let's be honest, that's not super helpful, and you're not going to be calculating that after your Ironman. Instead, something like 300 to 500 milliliters of fluid per hour is a good starting point, and see how you feel. Essentially, you just want to make sure that you are continuing to drink and not just forgetting about it. Like during your race, you'll want water with sodium because you'll be dehydrated. So you can either use electrolyte tablets or eat some salty snacks. So now definitely isn't a bad time to go for those pretzels or crisps that you didn't have on the run. To rest? Well, that's obvious. Enjoy the feeling of your incredible accomplishment and don't return to training too early. Give your body some TLC and it will really thank you for it. So, Ironman triathletes, that's the end of this complete nutrition guide. I really hope it was helpful for you and that it covered everything that you needed. If you still have some questions, then let me know in the comments and I'd be happy to answer them. But I would also love to hear if you've got an Ironman race coming up and how you get on with it. Otherwise, if you haven't already, I would really appreciate it if you gave the video a thumbs up, as it helps it to reach more budding Ironman triathletes, and subscribe for more triathlon nutrition videos. And make sure that you press the bell icon too. If you want some more great nutrition info to help with your training and your racing, then I have put a video next to me which you might find helpful. Otherwise, I will catch you next time.